Okay, well, it looks like most of us survived the first week of online learning. My class should not have been too difficult with the scavenger hunt. It was fun to see some of your results and things that you're doing. Some of you are obsessed with Animal Crossing if you have a Switch. Other people are, it was cool to see some of the pictures of your pets if you have a pet, or just pictures of you when you were younger, or just what you're doing in general. A lot of you are watching Netflix and Hulu. Um, but I know if you're like me, it's kind of, I don't want to say getting boring at being stuck at home, but it's getting kind of old and you have to find things to do to keep yourself entertained. One of the things that I did for April Fool's Day is I told Grayson and Aaron that I would make them some brown E's. And so I took some construction paper and cut up little E's and put them on a plate and gave it to him and said, "Here are the brownies I made for you." Grayson was not very happy or impressed, but needless to say, it was just a fun kind of little joke to do with them. Okay, so that is kind of some of the shenanigans that have been going on in my house. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this week. So this week we really need to focus on knowing what the difference is between a primary and a secondary source. And this is going to be important for when you move into 8th grade US history because you're going to need to know these things. Now you may have talked a little bit about this in 6th grade, but moving forward we're really going to put some emphasis on this and we'll be using primary and secondary sources a lot for the remainder of the year. So let's first talk about primary sources. So primary sources are a first-hand account of what happened. So this is something or someone that was there, okay? Now, a lot of times when we think about primary sources, we think of these things as things like a diary or a letter or an interview or a video, like live video coverage, or even a government document. But the thing is that primary sources can be other things as well. They could be poetry that somebody wrote about an event, maybe a piece of art or a photo that somebody took, or even a song that talks about what they are feeling or what they experienced. Additionally, these could be other things. Primary sources could be things like pottery, or it could be clothing, or it could even be buildings. Okay, so we need to know that primary sources are a first-hand account of what happened. So it is something that was there when the event took place. Now, a secondary source is used to describe an event, but they weren't there. So this is something that happened after the fact, or this is kind of like getting it secondhand. So maybe an example of this would be like if something happened and you weren't there, but you know about it because somebody told you. So an example that I gave earlier was I showed you the example of the brownies that I made for Grayson and Aaron. So even though what I told you and what I showed you would be the primary source, the pictures, let's say that you tell this to your mom or your dad, well then that would mean that what you tell them would be the secondary source, whereas I would have been the primary source. I hope that kind of makes sense. So these are some questions that we can ask to help us know if what we are looking at is a primary or a secondary source. So these could be things, questions that we want to ask ourselves are, what do we want to know about? We have to know what we are studying and what we want to know about. Who or what created the source? And what is the relationship between the source and what we are studying? So those are three really important questions that we need to ask ourselves to help us understand whether or not what we are looking at is a primary or secondary source. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go ahead and look at some examples and then determine based on these questions whether or not it is a primary or secondary source. Okay, so the first example that we are going to look at is this painting by Emanuel Leutze that he did in 1851 called Washington Crossing the Delaware. And this is a pretty famous painting. And let's say that we want to know about the American Revolutionary War, which happened from 1775 to 1783. And this is our source. Now, Emanuel Leutze was not alive when Washington crossed the Delaware or when the American Revolutionary War was happening. And so most likely he created this painting based on accounts that he had heard or that he had read. And so because we want to know about the American Revolutionary War, that means that this source would be a secondary source because Emanuel Lutz is recreating this based on what he learned and what he had heard about the event rather than what he actually experienced. Okay, our next example is another painting slash mural. And this is a mural that is in the Kansas State Capitol building in Topeka. It's called The Tragic Prelude, and it's by John Steuart Curry. And he worked on this mural from 1938 to 1940, so about a year and a couple months. And in the center, this is John Brown, and this is during the Bleeding Kansas period of Kansas history that happened before the Civil War. Now, what we want to know about is we want to know about John Steuart Curry. Now, because we want to know about John Steuart Curry, that is our question, and we have this painting that he created, that means that this painting would be a primary source. Now, if we wanted to know about Bleeding Kansas or John Brown, and those events happened 90 years before this was painted, then that would mean this would be a secondary source if we wanted to know about Bleeding Kansas or John Brown. But because we want to know about the artist, then that means that this would be a primary source because we are studying the artist who created it. Okay, our next example is if we have a copy of Dr. Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech. Now, some people get hung up because, oh, it's not the original speech, it's a copy of it. Well, most of the times historians aren't really working with the original copies. Even when we go to an archive, we might take a scan or a picture of it to take home with us to work. So don't be caught up in that this is a copy or somebody typed it up. Okay. So we have a copy of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and we want to know about Dr. Martin Luther King. So is this a primary or secondary source? So this would be a primary source because this is a speech that Dr. King wrote, and we could use this speech to study and learn more about him. So this would be a primary source. Okay, next, let's say that we want to learn about the Dust Bowl. And this is actually the textbook that we would normally use in our classroom, The Kansas Journey by Jenny Chin. Now, if we want to know about the Dust Bowl and we have this textbook, is this a primary or a secondary source? And so this would be a secondary source. All textbooks are secondary source because they are doing research and they take all these primary sources, they bring them together, and they create a history for people to read. Okay, so this would just be like any other book, but a textbook would be a secondary source. Okay, our next example is, let's say that you have this movie that some of you may have seen, but Remember the Titans, okay? And it was directed by Mr. Yankin, and it is about the story of Herman Boone, who was a football coach, high school football coach. Okay, now let's say that you have Remember the Titans and you want to use this to understand more about Herman Boone and what he went through as a football coach. Well, just like a lot of movies, whether it's Remember the Titans, can't think of another one off my head, but let's say that you wanted to use this, this would be a secondary source, okay? Most movies are secondary sources. The exception would be maybe a documentary that has interviews with people and are being put together, okay? Now, our last example that we're going to do is, let's say we wanted to do something, or we had this song, Ocean Eyes, and I'm not going to lie, I don't know if this is a good song or not, but it's by Billie Eilish, and we want to know more about Billie Eilish, okay? Now this is just like the painting we had with John Steuart Curry. So because we are studying the artist, the person that created it, then this would be a primary source, okay? So this would be a primary source. If we are looking at a song that somebody created, okay, that would be a primary source. Well, I hope that gave you some insights and ideas about what the difference is between a primary and secondary source, and hopefully help you to tell the difference and know when a source is a primary or secondary source. So our first assignment that we are going to do this week is going to be related to what we just went over. So what you're going to do is in Google Classroom, there is a link to a Google form. And in that Google form, the very first thing you're going to do is put your first and last name in your class period. It's very important that you put your first and last name, okay? Now, in the Google form, there are going to be images of primary sources, and it's going to be very similar to what we had here on the video. It's going to tell you what you want to know about, and then you are going to have to decide, based on the primary source, what you want to know about, who created it, and that relationship between the creator and what you want to know. You're going to have to make that decision of whether or not it's a primary or secondary source. Okay, so that is the first assignment. Very simple, very easy to do. Our second assignment that we're going to do this week is something that we are going to work on for the rest of the quarter. Now, this COVID-19 pandemic that we are experiencing is going to be something that your children and grandchildren are going to read in the history books of the future. This is something that's very historic. And so I think it's very fitting that as part of that, we journal and we create primary sources so people in the future can understand what we went through. So the first thing you're going to do for this assignment is you are going to go into Google Docs and you are going to create a new document, and it's going to be entitled just like this, and you need to rename it. And you're going to rename it with your first and last name and then COVID-19 journal. So this is what you are going to rename that document. Now this is really important. You are not going to turn in this document until the last week of school. You are not going to turn this in until the last week of school. Now that said, you are going to copy and paste and turn in portions of it as you work on this. Now let me give you an example. So what you're going to do is each week is you're going to respond to a prompt. Now here is a screenshot of the example that I provided you, because I'm going to be doing this as well. And this week prompt that asks you to just say a little bit about yourself and when you first heard about the coronavirus. So in that COVID-19 journal document you just created, you're going to respond to that. Now in Google Classroom, there will be a doc that says Journal Entry 1 or something similar. Now what you are going to do is you're going to take your pandemic journal, you're going to copy this, and then you're going to paste it into the Google Doc for the assignment that week. Now I hope that makes sense. I'm going to have this written out and typed in Google Classroom as well, but if you are confused, please email me and let me know. But basically what you need to know is that you have two documents. The journal that's going to be the thing that you are going to turn in at the very last week. And for each week's prompts that you write there, you're going to copy and paste and then turn that into each week for the assignment. I hope that makes sense. Okay, last, if you're having problems, my office hours are every day, Monday through Friday, 11 a.m., 12 p.m., and then 2 p.m. to 3. If you email me, I'm getting back to those emails as quick as possible, even if it's not during my office hours. If you want to call or even do a Zoom meeting, if that would help, that's fine. Just please make sure that your parents email me or they're there with you when I go over with this. That's just some new direction that we've been given as well. I hope you guys are safe. I hope you guys are healthy. Please be kind to each other and be patient if there's some confusion or if technology is not going well. Again, if you have issues or anything, please send me an email, get in touch with me. I'm here to help you. Okay, love you guys. Have another good week. Bye-bye.